There is a quiet tyranny that governs human existence, one so deeply woven into the fabric of perception that it goes unnoticed, like a dream mistaken for waking life. It is the tyranny of the mind's own architecture, a labyrinth of inherited assumptions and unchallenged narratives that dictate how we see the world, ourselves, and the very nature of reality. This is the mind prison, an invisible confinement built not of stone or iron, but of thought itself. Its walls are beliefs we mistake for truth. Its bars are patterns we mistake for inevitability, and its locks are fears we mistake for wisdom. We move through our days believing we are free, yet so much of what we do is dictated by ancient, unconscious scripts. We chase security, yet remain haunted by the specter of loss. We crave connection, yet reinforce the illusion of separation. We worship time, yet feel it slipping through our fingers like sand. We demand control, yet find ourselves perpetually at the mercy of forces beyond our command. These are not personal failings, but the echoes of much older traps, psychological snares set centuries ago, passed down through culture, language, and collective conditioning until they became the water in which we swim. The first of these traps whispers that we are alone, that the boundaries of our skin are the edges of our being, that every interaction is a transaction and every relationship a negotiation. This illusion of separation fractures the world into self and other, turning life into a silent competition where trust is vulnerability and love is risk. It is the root of loneliness in a crowded room, the quiet despair of feeling fundamentally unseen. The second trap is the distortion of time, not the practical measurement of hours and minutes, but the way we have internalized it as a force that owns us. We live suspended between regret and anticipation, treating the present as a fleeting inconvenience on the way to some imagined future. We speak of killing time or spending it wisely, as though it were currency rather than the very substance of existence. This tyranny turns life into a countdown, a race against an invisible clock that never stops ticking. The third and most seductive trap is the illusion of control, the desperate belief that if we just plan enough, work enough, or worry enough, we can bend reality to our will. It is the reason we cling to routines as though they were lifelines, why we mistake predictability for safety. But life is not a machine. It is a river, wild and untamable, and the more we try to dam it, the more it reminds us of its power. These traps are not accidents. They are the legacy of civilizations that prized order over spontaneity, certainty over mystery, possession over presence. They are the reason so many feel exhausted by lives that look successful on the surface but ache beneath it. Yet the prison is not locked. It is held together by belief, and belief can be undone. Every great awakening in history, whether spiritual, philosophical, or personal, begins with the same realization: that the walls were never real to begin with. To understand the mind prison is to recognize that its power lies not in its rigidity, but in its invisibility. Like a master illusionist, it directs our attention toward the spectacle of daily life, our ambitions, our conflicts, our fleeting pleasures, while the real mechanisms of control operate unnoticed in the shadows. The three ancient traps are not isolated phenomena but interlocking systems, each reinforcing the others in a self-perpetuating cycle. They form the foundation of a shared hallucination we call reality, a collective dream so convincing that few think to question its validity. The illusion of separation is perhaps the most fundamental of these traps, the primordial fracture from which the others emerge. It begins with the simple, seemingly innocuous belief that the self is a discrete entity, a solitary consciousness peering out at a world of external objects and other minds. This division feels so natural that we rarely pause to consider its absurdity. When we look at a tree, we do not say, "I am observing a part of myself." When we speak to another person, we do not genuinely feel that their joy or suffering is our own. Yet this perceived separation is a cultural artifact, not a universal truth. Indigenous wisdom traditions, mystical experiences, and even quantum physics point toward a deeper interconnectedness, a reality in which boundaries are fluid and the observer cannot be fully disentangled from the observed. Modern society, however, is built upon the myth of the separate self. Capitalism thrives on the idea that we are competing for limited resources. Political systems manipulate us by amplifying tribal divisions. Even our language reinforces the illusion. subject and object, noun and verb, me and you. The tragic irony is that the more we believe in our isolation, the more we create conditions that make it feel real. Suspicion breeds defensiveness, which breeds further suspicion, in an endless feedback loop. The prison walls grow taller, and we forget there was ever a time when we saw the world differently. The tyranny of time is the second great trap, a cultural hypnosis that transforms the flowing present into a scarce commodity. Unlike the cyclical time of ancient cultures, where seasons wheeled in eternal return and ancestors walked alongside the living, industrialized civilization gave us linear time, a one-way arrow hurtling toward an uncertain future. Clocks and calendars, once useful tools, became psychological dictators. Productivity replaced presence. Schedules replaced spontaneity. We began to speak of time as something we could waste or save, as though it were a possession rather than the very fabric of being. This distortion creates a peculiar form of suffering, the constant sensation of being late for our own lives. We postpone happiness until some future milestone, a promotion, a retirement, a hypothetical moment when everything will finally align. We ruminate on past mistakes, as though the weight of yesterday could be lightened by carrying it forever. And all the while, the present moment, the only place where life actually happens, slips through our fingers like smoke. The irony is that time itself is not the enemy. Our relationship to it is. In resisting its flow, we become like a swimmer fighting a current, exhausting ourselves against an immovable force. The mirage of control is the third trap, and perhaps the most insidious because it disguises itself as empowerment. It is the belief that with enough effort, enough foresight, enough sheer force of will, we can eliminate uncertainty from our lives. This illusion manifests in endless planning, in the compulsive need to micromanage outcomes, in the quiet panic that arises when things don't go according to script. At its core, it is a denial of life's fundamental nature, its unpredictability, its chaos, its refusal to conform to human expectations. The paradox is that the more we seek control, the more fragile we become. A life built on the demand for certainty is a house of cards, vulnerable to the slightest breeze. And when the inevitable disruptions come, the loss, the failure, the unforeseen catastrophe, we interpret them not as part of the human experience, but as personal betrayals by the universe. The alternative is not passivity, but adaptability, the recognition that real power lies not in resisting change, but in dancing with it. These three traps feed one another in a self-sustaining loop. The illusion of separation makes us fear vulnerability, so we seek control. The pursuit of control makes us obsessed with future outcomes, so we become slaves to time. The tyranny of time exhausts us, so we retreat further into isolation. And round it goes, generation after generation, until the prison feels like the only reality there is. But there is a crack in the system. Every so often, life delivers a moment of clarity, a glimpse beyond the walls. It might come in the stillness of meditation, in the shock of loss, in the unbidden joy of a spontaneous connection. In that instant, the machinery stutters, the illusion wavers, and we remember, if only faintly, that there was once a time before the prison. Beneath the surface of our conscious minds flow ancient rivers of meaning, carrying stories that have shaped human understanding since the first campfires cast shadows on cave walls. These are not mere tales but living blueprints of the mind prison, narratives so deeply embedded in our collective psyche that they continue to shape our perceptions in ways we scarcely recognize. To examine them is to hold up a mirror to the hidden architecture of our confinement, revealing how the traps manifest not just as individual psychological patterns but as grand cultural mythologies that transcend time and place. One such enduring narrative is the myth of the hero's solitary journey, a story told across civilizations from Gilgamesh to modern action films. On the surface, it speaks of courage and triumph, but its deeper message reinforces the illusion of separation. The idea that true achievement requires standing apart, that strength means independence from others. We see this in the archetype of the lone warrior, the self-made entrepreneur, the genius working in isolation. What goes unquestioned is the underlying assumption that connection is a liability rather than the source of all real power. The truth obscured by this myth is that no genuine creation or transformation happens in true isolation. Even the most solitary artist draws from a cultural lineage, and every breakthrough stands on the shoulders of countless unseen contributors. The hero's journey has become a prison of individualism, convincing us that asking for help is weakness and that vulnerability has no place in strength. The second great symbolic narrative is the parable of Kronos devouring his children, an image that perfectly captures our tortured relationship with time. In the original Greek myth, the Titan fears being overthrown by his offspring and so consumes each at birth, a chilling metaphor for how we sacrifice the present moment to our anxiety about the future. This story plays out daily in modern life as we feed our now to the insatiable appetite of later. We see it in the parent too busy building a future for their family to actually be with them, in the student postponing life until after exams, in the worker saving dreams for retirement. The myth has become so normalized that we rarely notice its violence, how it teaches us to cannibalize our own lives in service of a tomorrow that never actually arrives. The tragic irony is that in trying to secure time, we lose it completely, like a man holding water in a sieve. Perhaps the most pervasive of all is the alchemical fantasy of turning base metal into gold, which in its modern incarnation manifests as the belief that we can transform chaos into perfect order through sheer will. This myth fuels our obsession with control, promising that with the right system, the perfect routine, or sufficient discipline, we can eliminate life's inherent unpredictability. We see its influence everywhere, in the explosion of productivity cults, in the illusion that happiness can be hacked, in the multi-billion-dollar industries that sell the promise of a life without discomfort or surprise. What this narrative fails to acknowledge is that the true alchemical transformation was never about controlling elements but about surrendering to their transformative power. The recognition, as the ancient practitioners eventually discovered, that the real gold was the process itself, with all its mess and mystery intact. These myths persist because they contain partial truths wrapped in deeper deceptions. The hero does need courage, but not at the expense of connection. Time must be navigated, but not worshipped. Transformation is possible, but not through control. The prison walls are made of these half-truths taken as absolutes, these useful metaphors turned into unquestioned laws. And just as these narratives were constructed, they can be deconstructed, not through rejection but through reimagining, by teasing apart the wisdom from the wounding. Consider how different our world might be if we replaced the solitary hero with the story of the woven net, where strength comes from interconnection, where no thread stands alone but each relies on the others to create something far stronger than any individual strand. Imagine if we measured time not in productivity but in presence, not in hours spent but in moments fully inhabited. Picture a new alchemy where the goal isn't to eliminate life's randomness but to develop the resilience and wonder to meet it. These aren't naive fantasies but forgotten truths waiting to be remembered, alternative narratives that have always existed in the margins of our dominant stories, like wildflowers growing through cracks in pavement. The power of these deeper, symbolic narratives lies in their ability to bypass rational resistance and speak directly to the unconscious. That's why simply understanding the traps intellectually isn't enough. We need new stories to replace the old ones. Narratives that don't fight the prison but render it irrelevant by changing how we see. When the myths change, the world changes. Not overnight, but inevitably, as surely as water reshapes stone through persistent flow. The recognition of these ancient traps is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is the first step in a quiet revolution of being. To see the prison walls is to begin dissolving them, not through force, but through a gradual rewiring of perception that ripples outward into every facet of life. This transformation does not require withdrawal from the world, but rather a more conscious way of moving through it. A shift from automatic reaction to intentional response, from unconscious participation to mindful engagement. Consider how the illusion of separation manifests in daily existence. The subtle tension in a crowded elevator where strangers avoid eye contact, the unspoken competition between colleagues masking as professionalism, the way we scroll through digital feeds feeling more connected yet more alone than ever. The antidote begins with small but radical acts of reconnect ion, not as a technique, but as a way of reorienting to reality. It looks like the deliberate softening of barriers, holding a gaze a moment longer than comfortable, listening without preparing a response, allowing a stranger's joy or pain to resonate as if it were one's own. These are not sentimental gestures but rebellious ones, tiny fractures in the illusion that I am separate from you. In workplaces, It might mean valuing collaboration over individual heroics. In communities, prioritizing collective well-being over personal gain. The more these moments accumulate, the more the foundational lie of separation begins to unravel on its own. The tyranny of time loses its grip when we reclaim attention as our most sacred resource. Modern life thrives on fragmented awareness, multitasking as virtue, distraction as norm, busyness as status symbol. Yet the portal to presence is always available in the simplest acts. Feeling the weight of a coffee cup in the morning, noticing the play of shadows on pavement, attending fully to a single breath without needing to post or document it. The revolutionary act is not in rejecting schedules altogether, but in refusing to let them dictate the quality of our presence. A meeting agenda may structure time, but it need not strip away our capacity to truly listen. A deadline can orient action without demanding we sacrifice aliveness to meet it. The more we anchor in the sensory richness of the present, the more time paradoxically expands, not because hours grow longer, but because we become more available to the life happening within them. The mirage of control is perhaps the most challenging trap to unwind, surrounded as we are by cultural messages equating mastery with worth. The shift here is from rigid certainty to flexible trust, not passive resignation, but active participation without attachment to fixed outcomes. In practical terms, this means planning with open hands, preparing diligently while remaining unattached to how events should unfold. A parent might release the need to micromanage a child's path, instead fostering resilience for whatever road they take. A leader could focus less on enforcing compliance and more on cultivating collective adaptability. Even in personal goals, the emphasis moves from demanding specific results to showing up fully for the process itself. The paradox is that this surrender to uncertainty often yields better outcomes than white-knuckled control ever could. Not because the universe rewards letting go, but because fluid awareness perceives opportunities rigid agendas miss. These integrations have profound societal implications. Economic systems built on separation and scarcity begin to shift when enough people prioritize connection over consumption. Education transforms when learning matters more than standardized metrics of progress. Healthcare evolves when healing isn't reduced to mechanistic interventions but embraces the interconnected nature of mind, body, and community. Even technology, so often an amplifier of these ancient traps, could be redesigned to foster presence rather than fragmentation, if the demand for such change grows loud enough. The most subversive realization is that no external revolution is required to begin this transformation. The prison walls were always made of thought, and thought can change, not through sheer will, but through the gentle, persistent return to what is actually here. The warmth of a hand, the sound of rain, the space between breaths where all stories fall away. Each moment of authentic presence, each choice to connect rather than isolate, each release of the need to control the uncontrollable. These are the quiet tools of liberation. They don't destroy the mind's traps so much as reveal they were never truly solid to begin with, only patterns mistaken for walls. At the heart of this exploration lies a simple but radical invitation: to stop seeking freedom and start noticing where it has always been available. The mind prison's greatest trick was convincing us we were trapped in the first place. Its dissolution begins not with grand gestures, but with the accumulation of small awakenings. The sudden recognition during an ordinary day that you are breathing, that light is falling across surfaces in beautiful ways, that the person before you is not an obstacle or means to an end but a living universe unto themselves. This is not about achieving some perfected state of enlightenment, but about the willingness to show up for life as it is, messy, uncertain, and breathtakingly alive. The traps lose power not when we fight them, but when we see through them. And in that seeing, something extraordinary happens. What once felt like confinement becomes the open sky. The separate self relaxes into connection. Time ceases to be a tyrant and becomes simply the ground of experience. The need for control gives way to a deeper trust in the intelligence of life's unfolding. None of this happens overnight, nor does it follow a linear path. But each moment of awareness is a stone dropped into still waters, its ripples extending farther than we can measure. The call, then, is not to effort but to attention, to become curious about the texture of your own experience. When you feel the old traps tighten, when isolation feels real, when time becomes a lash, when the need for control becomes frantic, Pause. Breathe. Question. Ask what story you're believing in this moment, and whether it's truly serving life. The prison walls were built one thought at a time. They dissolve the same way. Not through force, but through the gentle, insistent light of awareness. This is how cultures change, not through top-down decrees, but through countless individuals waking up to their own minds. Your clarity becomes a beacon whether you intend it or not. Your presence gives others permission to inhabit their own. And so the unraveling spreads, not as doctrine but as lived truth, until one day we look back and wonder how we ever believed those walls were real. The gates were open all along. Step through.